Racist? That's what they called him before anyone bothered to ask a single question. The words drifted across the humid North Carolina afternoon, just as Marcus Bennett slid out from beneath the front bumper of his dark blue pickup truck, a socket wrench still resting in his grease-stained hand. The truck had died without warning on the shoulder of a busy 4-lane road less than 2 miles from his neighborhood, forcing him to pull over beside a small auto parts store whose security cameras quietly watched every parking space and every passing car. The July sun reflected off the windshield so brightly it almost erased the shape of the man working beneath it. Sweat rolled down Marcus's temples, leaving clean lines through the thin layer of engine dust on his face, but he hardly noticed. He had spent nearly 15 years repairing engines for other people, and this looked like nothing more than a faulty battery cable or a loose ground connection. He checked his watch. His daughter would finish her summer reading program at the public library in less than 45 minutes, and he hated the thought of keeping her waiting. Marcus reached into the engine bay once more, tightened a worn connector, and quietly whispered to himself that maybe this would be enough to get the truck moving again. The afternoon traffic flowed steadily beside him, filling the air with the low rumble of tires rolling across hot pavement and the occasional hiss of air brakes from passing delivery trucks. A young couple walked past carrying shopping bags, barely glancing in his direction. An elderly man paused for a second, nodded politely, then continued toward the hardware store. To everyone else, Marcus was simply another mechanic trying to get home after work. Then a police cruiser eased into the parking lot. Its tires rolled slowly over the faded white lines before stopping several yards behind the pickup. Marcus didn't immediately look up. He assumed the officer was checking to see if he needed roadside assistance. Instead, the driver's door opened with deliberate precision. Officer Daniel Brooks stepped out, adjusting the radio clip to his shoulder before studying Marcus from a distance. His eyes moved from the open hood to the toolbox lying on the asphalt, then to Marcus's oil-stained uniform shirt. Without asking what had happened or whether the truck belonged to him, Brooks began walking forward with measured confidence. Nearby conversations grew quieter. People naturally slowed whenever a police officer approached someone on the roadside. Marcus finally noticed the shadow stretching across the pavement and stood carefully, wiping his hands with an old shop towel before offering a respectful smile. "Afternoon, officer," he said calmly. Before another word could leave his mouth, Brooks raised one hand and instructed him to step away from the vehicle while keeping his hands where they could be seen. Marcus blinked once, surprised more than frightened. He looked from the officer to his own truck and back again, trying to understand what had changed in the last 10 seconds. The engine was still warm. The hood was still open. The keys remained in the ignition exactly where he had left them. Nothing about the scene had changed except the assumption someone had already made. Across the street, unnoticed by everyone gathered there, a city traffic camera continued its silent sweep over the intersection. Above the storefront entrance, another camera captured the parking lot from a higher angle. Inside a nearby sedan waiting at the stoplight, a dashboard camera recorded continuously, second after second, without emotion or opinion. None of them spoke. None of them judged. They simply watched. Marcus Bennett had learned long ago that patience often solved problems faster than anger ever could. At 36 years old, he had spent more mornings listening to stubborn engines than arguing with people, and machines, unlike assumptions, always revealed the truth if someone looked closely enough. Every weekday before sunrise, he unlocked the service bay at Carter Family Auto Repair, where the scent of motor oil mixed with fresh coffee and the steady rhythm of impact wrenches became the soundtrack of his life. Customers trusted him because he never recommended repairs they did not need. If replacing a $10 connector would fix the problem, he never suggested replacing an entire system. That quiet honesty had earned him something far more valuable than tips. It had earned him respect from neighbors who knew exactly where to find him whenever their cars refused to start. After work, he usually drove across town to pick up his 10-year-old daughter, Ava, from whatever school program or library event she happened to be attending. Since his wife had passed away several years earlier after a long illness, every afternoon belonged to the two of them. They shared simple routines that never felt ordinary to Marcus. On Fridays, they stopped for peach milkshakes. On Saturdays, they washed the truck together in the driveway. On Sundays, Ava insisted on choosing the music while they drove to church, always pretending she was the family disc jockey. Those little traditions held their world together. Earlier that same morning, Ava had smiled before climbing out of the truck, reminding him not to forget the science project she had left behind the driver's seat. Marcus had laughed and promised he would bring it when he picked her up later. The colorful poster board still rested safely inside the extended cab, protected from the summer heat beneath a light blanket. It was impossible for Marcus to look inside the truck without thinking about his daughter. Every fingerprint on the passenger window, every tiny wrapper tucked into the cup holder, every crayon hidden beneath the seat reminded him that the pickup was more than transportation. It was the place where bedtime stories were rehearsed on long drives, multiplication tables were practiced at red lights, and difficult conversations somehow became easier. As Officer Brooks stood several feet away watching him with an expression Marcus could not quite read, Marcus slowly reached into his shirt pocket with careful movements and spoke in the same calm voice he used with nervous customers. He explained that his driver's license was in his wallet and that the truck registration was inside the glove compartment. He even pointed toward the repair shop logo embroidered above his name, hoping it might explain why his hands and uniform were covered with grease. His words were measured, respectful, and completely ordinary, yet they seemed to disappear into the thick afternoon air before reaching the officer. Around them, the parking lot grew strangely quiet. A cashier standing just inside the auto parts store looked through the glass doors without stepping outside. Two teenagers loading bags into the trunk of their sedan stopped talking altogether. Somewhere nearby, an air conditioner hummed against the brick wall, while a loose American flag above the storefront fluttered softly in the warm breeze. Everything felt suspended, as though the entire afternoon had paused to witness what would happen next, while high above the intersection the unblinking cameras continued preserving every second with perfect silence. Officer Daniel Brooks had built a reputation inside the department for acting quickly and asking questions later, a habit that some coworkers quietly admired and others avoided discussing. During roll call, he often spoke about instinct as though it were stronger than evidence, insisting that experienced officers could recognize trouble before it unfolded. Commendation plaques lined one wall of the precinct hallway, reminders of traffic stops, stolen vehicle recoveries, and arrests that had helped shape his confidence over the years. To Brooks, hesitation looked like weakness, and certainty felt like professionalism, even when certainty arrived long before the facts did. As he stood in the shimmering afternoon heat facing Marcus, his attention settled on details that seemed to reinforce the conclusion already forming in his mind. He noticed the open hood before he noticed the registration sticker on the windshield. He noticed the grease on Marcus's hands before he noticed the embroidered repair shop logo stitched across his work shirt. He noticed a black man beside a disabled vehicle before he considered the possibility that the vehicle belonged to him. The radio clipped to his shoulder crackled with routine dispatch traffic, but Brooks barely acknowledged it. He had convinced himself that he was preventing a crime before anyone else even realized one was happening. Marcus remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, keeping both hands visible and speaking with steady courtesy. He explained again that he worked as a mechanic less than 5 miles away and that the truck had stalled while he was driving to pick up his daughter. He offered to retrieve the registration only if the officer gave permission. Every sentence was calm, clear, and respectful. Brooks answered with another instruction instead of another question, asking Marcus to remain still while he walked slowly around the pickup. He peered through the windows, glanced at the toolbox resting on the pavement, and briefly looked inside the truck bed where neatly organized equipment reflected years of careful work. Then his eyes paused on the colorful science project tucked beneath the blanket in the back seat. He frowned as though the simple presence of a child's poster board required another explanation instead of confirming the one Marcus had already given. Around them, ordinary life continued in uneasy silence. Customers entering the auto parts store slowed their pace without realizing it. A landscaping crew across the street switched off their leaf blowers for a moment, allowing the sounds of passing traffic and distant birds to fill the air. Warm sunlight shimmered across the chrome bumper, while the faint smell of hot asphalt drifted upward with every passing breeze. Near the front entrance, a woman waiting for a curbside pickup quietly reached for her phone, uncertain whether she should record what she was witnessing. Another driver stopped at the traffic light, glanced toward the scene, his dashboard camera continuing to capture the intersection without interruption. Marcus looked briefly toward the sky, blinking against the bright afternoon light, then returned his attention to the officer without raising his voice or changing his posture. He still believed that one honest conversation could clear away a misunderstanding. What he could not see was that several silent lenses had already begun preserving a very different story than the one forming inside Officer Brooks's mind. And unlike memory, those cameras would remember every word, every pause, and every choice exactly as they happened. The silence stretched, so long that even the passing traffic seemed to fade into the background. Marcus could hear the faint ticking of his truck's cooling engine beneath the raised hood, each metallic click reminding him that only minutes earlier his biggest concern had been getting the pickup running before he was late to the library. He kept his shoulders relaxed and his hands visible, refusing to let confusion become frustration. "Officer, if you will allow me," he said carefully. "The registration is inside the glove compartment, and the insurance card is right behind it. My driver's license is in my wallet. I will not reach for anything unless you tell me to." His voice carried no anger, only the calm confidence of a man who believed that facts would settle the situation. Officer Brooks looked directly at him, but did not acknowledge the offer. Instead, he instructed Marcus to step farther away from the truck while another patrol unit was requested over the radio. The request caused several people nearby to exchange uncertain glances. What had appeared to be a simple roadside conversation was beginning to feel much more serious. Marcus obeyed without hesitation, taking slow, measured steps exactly where he was directed. His socket wrench remained on the pavement beside the front tire, untouched. His toolbox stayed open, every tool neatly arranged inside exactly as he had left it. Nothing about the scene suggested panic or haste. Everything reflected the habits of a professional mechanic interrupted in the middle of routine work. A middle-aged woman standing outside the auto parts store quietly spoke to the cashier through the open doorway. Moments later, another employee stepped outside carrying a clipboard, recognizing Marcus almost immediately. He started to say that Marcus had purchased replacement battery terminals less than 20 minutes earlier, but Brooks politely instructed him to remain back while the investigation continued. The employee nodded, although uncertainty settled across his face. Marcus noticed him and offered a small, reassuring smile, silently asking him not to argue. He had spent his entire adult life teaching his daughter that respect mattered even during difficult moments, and he refused to abandon that lesson now. A warm breeze drifted through the parking lot, rustling the small American flags displayed outside the storefront. Somewhere overhead, wind chimes hanging from a nearby porch produced soft, uneven notes that floated across the afternoon air. The contrast felt almost unreal. Nature remained peaceful while tension quietly gathered below. Several more vehicles stopped at the red light bordering the intersection, their drivers looking toward the unusual scene. One driver lowered his window slightly, allowing the tiny dashboard camera mounted beneath his rearview mirror to capture an even clearer view. Across the street, a delivery truck idled while its driver waited for the signal to change, completely unaware that his own forward-facing camera was recording the same encounter from another angle. Marcus glanced briefly toward his pickup once more, thinking about the science project waiting inside and the promise he had made Ava only a few hours earlier. He wondered if she would become worried when he failed to arrive on time. Still, he remained composed. He answered every question directly. He followed every instruction exactly. He believed that patience would eventually make room for truth. What no one standing in that parking lot fully realized was that while opinions differed from one witness to another, every silent camera surrounding the intersection was preserving one complete story without interruption, without assumption, and without choosing sides. The second patrol car arrived with its emergency lights flashing silently, bathing the storefront windows in alternating shades of blue and red that reflected across the polished chrome of Marcus's pickup. The colors danced over the glass like restless waves, drawing even more attention from passing drivers and nearby shoppers. Marcus remained exactly where he had been instructed to stand, his breathing steady despite the growing crowd. He looked once toward the public library less than 3 miles away and imagined Ava checking the clock, wondering why her father had not arrived. The thought weighed more heavily on him than the questions surrounding his truck. Officer Brooks spoke briefly with the newly arrived officer before returning his attention to Marcus. He explained that until ownership of the vehicle could be confirmed, additional procedures would be followed. Marcus nodded respectfully and answered in the same calm voice he had maintained from the beginning. The title is registered in my name. The paperwork is inside the glove compartment. The repair shop where I work can verify where I have been all day. My manager will answer the phone. His words were clear, organized, and sincere, but they seemed unable to break through the conclusions that had already settled over the scene. Brooks instructed Marcus that he would be temporarily detained while the situation was sorted out. Marcus quietly complied, making no sudden movements and offering no resistance of any kind. Several people watching from the sidewalk exchanged uneasy looks. The employee from the auto parts store shifted his weight as though considering whether to speak again, then stopped himself. Across the parking lot, the middle-aged woman who had been waiting for curbside pickup quietly raised her phone and continued recording. She did not narrate. She did not interfere. She simply preserved what she was seeing. The traffic signal changed, releasing another line of vehicles through the intersection, yet many drivers slowed just enough to look toward the gathering. Their expressions varied from curiosity to concern, but none of them knew how the story had begun. They only saw a mechanic in a work uniform standing beside an unfinished repair while multiple cameras quietly documented every passing second. Marcus lowered his eyes for a brief moment and noticed the familiar edge of Ava's colorful science project visible through the rear passenger window. Bright construction paper, carefully cut stars, and handwritten labels peeked from beneath the protective blanket. He remembered helping her glue every piece together at the kitchen table only 2 nights earlier while she proudly explained the phases of the moon. A faint smile crossed his face despite everything happening around him. He silently hoped someone from the library would tell her. He was coming as soon as he could. Above the intersection, the afternoon sun slipped behind a passing cloud, softening the harsh glare that had covered the parking lot all day. The change in light revealed something no one standing there seemed to notice. Mounted high on the utility pole overlooking the entire scene, the city traffic camera slowly adjusted its focus. At nearly the same moment, the auto parts store security system saved another continuous segment of footage, while a dashboard camera inside a delivery truck and the phone held by the waiting customer continued recording without interruption. Human memories would soon disagree about what had happened that afternoon, but those silent lenses were preserving every instruction, every response, every pause, and every decision with perfect accuracy, waiting for the moment when the truth would matter more than assumptions. Time seemed to slow as the afternoon settled into an uneasy stillness. The flashing lights reflected softly across the polished hood of Marcus's pickup, but even they felt quieter now, as though the entire parking lot had exhausted itself from holding its breath. Marcus stood patiently near the edge of the sidewalk, his eyes drifting toward the truck that had carried nearly every important memory of the last several years. Through the rear window, he could still see Ava's science project resting exactly where he had placed it that morning, the bright construction paper glowing gently beneath the filtered sunlight. He pictured her sitting on the library steps with her backpack resting beside her shoes, scanning every passing vehicle, convinced that her father would appear around the next corner just as he always did. The image settled heavily in his chest, yet his expression never changed. He had promised himself years ago that his daughter would learn strength from his example rather than fear from his reactions. So he remained calm. A warm breeze drifted across the parking lot carrying the scent of fresh-cut grass from a nearby park and the faint aroma of coffee from the convenience store next door. Somewhere above, wind stirred the leaves of an old maple tree until they shimmered beneath the afternoon light, creating soft patches of moving shade across the pavement. The sounds of the city slowly returned. Shopping carts rattled across the sidewalk. A child laughed somewhere beyond the gas station. An 18-wheeler downshifted several blocks away before disappearing around the corner. Life continued with remarkable indifference while Marcus silently waited for someone to look beyond assumptions and simply examine the facts. Officer Brooks remained occupied speaking with the second officer, occasionally glancing toward Marcus before returning to his conversation. Neither man seemed aware that almost every angle of the parking lot was being quietly documented. High above them, the city traffic camera completed another slow sweep across the intersection. The auto parts store security system captured every reflection in its front windows. Inside, the delivery truck stopped at the light. The dashboard camera recorded continuously, storing each second without interruption. Even the customer standing near the entrance continued holding her phone with steady hands, lowering it only briefly to wipe away the perspiration collecting on her forehead before raising it again. None of those devices understood fairness or prejudice. They simply remembered. Marcus lowered his gaze toward his grease-stained hands. Those hands had rebuilt engines, repaired brakes during winter storms, changed flat tires for stranded strangers, and assembled a cardboard model of the solar system with his daughter only 2 evenings earlier. They carried the faint scent of motor oil no matter how many times he washed them, a reminder of honest work performed one bolt at a time. He quietly flexed his fingers, then looked once more toward the road leading to the library. The sun slipped behind another cloud, softening every shadow across the pavement until the bright reflections faded into muted gray. In that gentle silence, surrounded by people forming opinions from only a few scattered moments, the only witnesses preserving the complete truth remained the silent cameras overhead, patiently collecting every detail while waiting for the moment when someone would finally decide to watch instead of merely assume. The breakthrough arrived quietly, almost unnoticed, nearly 2 hours after the roadside stop had begun. A police supervisor pulled into the parking lot after receiving several calls from concerned witnesses who all insisted they had seen the same encounter from different angles. Unlike everyone else who had relied on first impressions, Lieutenant Sarah Collins asked a simple question before saying anything else. "Has anyone reviewed the available video?" The silence that followed carried more weight than any accusation. Officer Brooks hesitated before admitting that no footage had yet been examined because he believed the situation had already been understood. Collins looked toward the row of businesses surrounding the intersection and immediately noticed the security cameras mounted above the storefronts. She spotted the traffic camera overlooking the signal, then turned toward the woman who had quietly remained near the entrance holding her phone. One by one, pieces of the afternoon began moving into place. Within minutes, the owner of the auto parts store welcomed the officers into the office behind the sales counter and opened the security system. The first recording showed Marcus arriving alone, parking carefully on the shoulder after the truck stalled, raising the hood, unloading his toolbox, and beginning the repair exactly as he had described. There was no rush, no attempt to conceal anything, and no sign that he had approached another vehicle. The second recording from the city traffic camera confirmed the same timeline from above, capturing the truck gradually rolling onto the shoulder before Marcus calmly stepped out and lifted the hood. The dashboard camera from the delivery truck filled in another angle, clearly recording Marcus offering several times to present his driver's license, registration, and insurance card while waiting for permission before making a single movement. Finally, the phone recording from the waiting customer preserved every word spoken after the second patrol car arrived, including Marcus's repeated requests for the officers to verify the documents inside the glove compartment and contact his repair shop. None of the recordings matched the assumptions that had guided the investigation. Instead, every camera revealed the same quiet truth from a different perspective. Marcus had remained respectful from beginning to end. He had followed every instruction without argument. He had never attempted to leave, conceal evidence, or prevent anyone from examining the truck. The room inside the auto parts store grew remarkably still as each recording ended. Lieutenant Collins folded her arms and looked toward Officer Brooks without raising her voice. The confidence that had filled the parking lot earlier slowly disappeared beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. Outside, Marcus remained where he had patiently waited, unaware that the silent witnesses above the streets and attached to nearby buildings had finally spoken in the only language that could not be distorted. Facts had replaced assumptions, and the truth, preserved frame by frame without emotion or prejudice, had quietly begun changing everything. When Lieutenant Sarah Collins stepped back outside, the atmosphere had changed in a way that every person standing in the parking lot could feel without anyone saying a word. The flashing lights were still there, the patrol cars remained parked in the same places, and the afternoon sun still reflected across the windshields. Yet the confidence that had filled the scene earlier had quietly disappeared. Collins walked directly toward Marcus with measured steps, stopping only a few feet away before meeting his eyes. Her voice remained calm and professional, as she explained that the available recordings had confirmed his account from beginning to end. The misunderstanding had been fully documented, and he was free to continue his day. Marcus listened without interruption, offering only a small nod before thanking her for taking the time to review the evidence. He did not raise his voice. He did not demand an argument. He simply accepted the truth that had finally been allowed to speak for itself. Officer Brooks stood several yards away, watching the conversation unfold with an expression far different from the certainty he had carried earlier that afternoon. For the first time since arriving, he looked toward the cameras mounted above the storefronts instead of toward Marcus. It was as though he had finally realized that every decision had been preserved exactly as it happened. Collins quietly instructed another officer to assist Marcus in retrieving the paperwork from the glove compartment. The registration matched his driver's license. The insurance card was current. The vehicle identification number matched every official record without exception. Even the receipt from the auto parts store, time-stamped less than 30 minutes before the encounter, confirmed that Marcus had purchased the replacement battery connector he had been installing when everything began. Piece by piece, every ordinary detail that Marcus had calmly described became another confirmation of his honesty. The employee from the repair shop arrived soon afterward, having rushed over after receiving several missed calls from coworkers who had heard what was happening. Without hesitation, he confirmed Marcus had worked a full shift that day before leaving early to pick up his daughter from the library. Several customers standing nearby quietly lowered their phones, not because the story had become less important, but because the truth no longer needed speculation. It had already been captured. Collins apologized on behalf of the department, acknowledging that careful verification should always come before conclusions. Marcus accepted her words with quiet dignity. Then he surprised everyone by asking for only one thing. He said he hoped the recordings would be used during future officer training so that another hardworking father would never have to spend an afternoon proving something that simple questions could have established within minutes. His request settled over the crowd with remarkable weight. It was not revenge that filled the parking lot. It was reflection. The breeze returned, gently lifting the edge of the blanket covering Ava's science project inside the truck. Sunlight broke through the clouds once again, illuminating the colorful model through the rear window. In that moment, the cameras had accomplished something greater than preserving evidence. They had preserved an opportunity for accountability, reminding everyone present that justice becomes stronger when people choose to look carefully before deciding what they believe. Marcus climbed back into his pickup just as the late afternoon sun dipped lower across the Carolina sky, casting long golden reflections over the windshield that only hours earlier had mirrored flashing patrol lights. He rested both hands on the steering wheel for a quiet moment before turning the key. The engine started on the first try, its smooth, familiar hum filling the cab with a sense of ordinary life that suddenly felt extraordinary. He reached into the back seat, carefully lifted Ava's science project, and brushed a speck of dust from one corner before placing it safely beside him. Nothing about the colorful display had changed, yet somehow it seemed to carry greater meaning now. It represented promises kept, lessons passed from one generation to the next, and the quiet determination to keep moving forward even after difficult days. When Marcus finally arrived at the library, Ava was sitting patiently on a wooden bench beneath a large oak tree, her backpack resting beside her and a library book still open across her lap. The moment she spotted the familiar blue pickup turning into the parking lot, her face brightened with the effortless smile only a child could give. She hurried toward him as he stepped out of the truck, wrapping both arms around his waist without asking why he had been late. Marcus hugged her gently and handed her the science project with an apologetic smile. "I told you I would bring it," he said softly. Ava looked up at him with complete trust. "I knew you would," she answered. Those 4 simple words settled deeper into his heart than anything else that had happened that day. Several weeks later, the recordings from the intersection were incorporated into new department training sessions, reminding officers that careful observation must always come before assumptions and that every person deserves to be treated with fairness and dignity. Marcus returned to his repair shop, where customers continued arriving with engines that rattled, batteries that failed, and brakes that squealed. He greeted each person with the same patience he had always shown, never allowing one painful afternoon to harden the kindness that defined him. Some evenings neighbors still stopped by his driveway asking for advice about unusual engine noises, and Marcus always found time to help. Officer Brooks was no longer the confident figure who believed instinct alone was enough. His decisions were reviewed, and the events of that afternoon became a lasting reminder inside the department that accountability begins with humility. As for the cameras, they remained exactly where they had always been, mounted quietly above streets, storefronts, and intersections, asking for nothing and judging no one. They simply continued recording ordinary moments that most people never noticed. On a warm Saturday evening, Marcus and Ava washed the pickup together in their driveway, just as they always had. Water sparkled beneath the setting sun while laughter drifted across the quiet neighborhood. When they finished, Marcus looked at the clean reflection shining across the hood and saw not the memory of suspicion, but the image of a father standing beside his daughter with nothing left to prove. The evening breeze carried the scent of fresh grass through the neighborhood as the last rays of sunlight faded into the horizon, leaving behind only silence, steady breathing, and the quiet comfort of a life restored by truth instead of assumptions.